Welcome to Channel 24. Major General Mick Ryan, a retired Australian Army general, military analyst, and a strong friend of Ukraine, is joining us now. General Ryan, thank you for being with us.
It's always a pleasure, Natalie. It's good to speak with you.
General Ryan, Ukraine says that Russia has intensified offensive operations along to the front line. It's according to General Syrskyi. At the same time, Ukrainian intelligence says Russian losses are higher than Russia's ability to replace them. So what is driving this offensive? Is Moscow ready to, lose a huge numbers of soldiers just to keep pressure on Ukraine? Where is this, the middle of this, that they are doing their offensive, but at the same time, they're losing a lot of people?
Well, Russia's trying to do what it's done each spring over the last several years, which is to attrit Ukraine's armed forces, take territory, but also project to the United States and other countries that a Russian victory in Ukraine is inevitable. Now, we know that is not the case, and it appears this year that the Ukrainian armed forces, with their defensive preparations, the increase in capability with drones, have really made Russia's job much, much more harder, and they really haven't been that successful in their spring offensive so far.
And yeah, you have written in one of your latest articles that Russia has made no real strategic gains in this 2026 and has even lost some territory. So does this mean that strategically Ukrainian now winning even if we are not having any breakthroughs on the front line?
Well, I think I'd describe it as the first glimmers of turning the corner for Ukraine. I think we're starting to see a shift in the strategic momentum to Ukraine, not just on the front line, but in its long-range strike operations, in its bolstering its economy with the $90 billion loan from Europe, while Russia's economy is getting worse, and diplomatically. President Zelensky, with his visits throughout Europe and the Middle East, has really increased diplomatic support for Ukraine, particularly with the very important counter-drone assistance that Ukraine recently provided to many Middle East countries.
Yes, General Ryan, speaking about the 90 billion loan for Ukraine from the European Union, do you think that's going to change things for Ukraine dramatically, in a good way?
Well, it's very important. I mean, whilst you fight a war, you still have to run a country. You need to be able to pay the salaries of teachers, train drivers, firemen, policemen and women who provide the essential services to keep a society running while others are out fighting for the security of that society. So I think that $90 billion loan is enormously important. That should bolster Ukraine's national budget for 2 to 3 years, and hopefully within that time we should see a resolution to the war that's favourable to Ukraine.
You mentioned Ukrainian drones, and you probably know that we have a very heavy discussion right now in our society about the exports of our equipment, of our weapon. And a lot of, I would say, critics saying right now that we have kind of lost this window of opportunities. Do you think that we still have a chance to be, one of the main military suppliers in Europe at this stage?
I think Ukraine absolutely does. Certainly there are many countries in Europe and North America who are catching up with the technology that Ukraine has developed. Whether they'll be able to build it as cheaply and as well as Ukraine is a different story. What none of those countries have, with the exception of Ukraine, is the experience, the techniques, the tactics, and the real-world operating knowledge of how these drones are best used, how they're best integrated into conventional military units. That's Ukraine's real superpower with drones. No one else has that kind of knowledge.
Yes, and speaking about diplomacy, you mentioned. So peace talks appear to be paused, stalled. What are Ukraine's real options right now? Do you think that Donald Trump still really has lost his interest in Russia's war against Ukraine?
Well, he appears to for the time being. I think the war in Iran is going so poorly for the Trump administration that he and his national security team are largely focused on that war. But at some point, we might hope that they return their attention to the war, and this time they have negotiators who are more evenly balanced rather than biased towards Russia.
Rather than biased towards Russia?
Yeah, I think so. I think that the negotiators that America's sent really haven't demonstrated a level of total commitment to both sides. I think they've been more enamoured with the Russian side, and frankly, the Trump administration's inability to criticise the Putin regime whilst criticising the democracy that's Ukraine and President Zelensky doesn't give me good confidence that they will strongly support an outcome that's equitable and just for Ukraine. But, you know, if Ukraine can really show this year that Russia is not capable of winning this war and that they will indeed lose this war, perhaps the Trump administration may change its approach.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky just a few days ago said that we are ready to meet with a Russian dictator whenever it is, but not in Minsk and definitely not in Moscow. Do you think this is kind of a meeting that could happen potentially in the nearest future?
Well, certainly the Ukrainian side, led by President Zelensky, have been much more open to negotiations and peace talks over the past year than the Russians have. The Russians have essentially stuck with the same old line that they've maintained since before the full-scale invasion, which is a full-scale capitulation by the Ukrainian state and the Ukrainian people. That's unacceptable to Ukraine, as it should be. But I think even with that happening, President Zelensky has been very patient and has played a very clever strategic game by remaining open to talks.
Absolutely. And also, CNN reports that Russia is increasing repression inside the country. How far can this go? Is the Kremlin preparing Russian society for even a longer and a more brutal war?
Well, I think this is more about Putin's power base, although it's related to the war. I mean, Russia's never really been a free and open country. Putin really is just returning it to its roots, which is a strict societal hierarchy where those at the top have all the power and those at the bottom have none.
You know, I was listening the security conference that happened in Kyiv just a few days ago, and they were saying that Europe is not prepared for for a huge war in terms of readiness of the missiles and rockets, this kind of systems. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think they're more prepared now than they were 5 years ago, but it's been a long journey even to get to this point, and there's still a long way to go. I think the build-up of European defence industries, their air, missile and drone defences still leaves something to be desired, but you are seeing the political willingness to spend more money in defence. You're seeing a massive build-up in Eastern Europe and in Germany and places like this. It takes time. But within a couple of years, I expect to see a far more capable European military capacity.
General Ryan, you know that Ukraine is working on its own air defense. Do you think that when it's going to be ready, in a year or two, or I think maybe a prototype still? So do you think that could be a turning point in Russia's war against Ukraine, or there is no such thing as a turning point when it comes to war?
Well, there's certainly turning points in wars. We've seen that throughout history, and we may be approaching another one now in the war in Ukraine. If Ukraine was able to develop a missile that was capable of bringing down Russian ballistic and cruise missiles, that's the real gap that needs to be filled if Patriots aren't available. That would be a very significant achievement. So hopefully Ukraine can do that. That would really be the last component of what is by and large, an extraordinarily effective Ukrainian air defense system.
You know, what else is interesting? That the Washington Post report growing fatigue and even despair inside Russia. How much does this actually affect Russia's ability to fight, or is still irrelevant for now?
Well, I'm glad to hear there's increasing despair and fatigue inside Russia. There should be. They're losing this war. There's almost no prospect of Russia winning this war. And the more despair and fatigue there is, hopefully the more pressure there is on Putin to end this war. But there's no sign of that yet. We're just seeing more repression and more pressure placed on a whole range of people in society sign up their young men and women to serve against Ukraine.
You know, just 2 days ago, we marked the anniversary of a Chernobyl catastrophe in Ukraine. Not 2 days ago, on the 26th of April. And, for me, it raises a difficult question about actually nuclear weapon. Would it be useful for Ukraine or even appropriate to have it again? And how much it will deter Russia?
Well, nuclear weapons have been shown to be an extraordinary deterrent, but not a total deterrent against conventional military operations. But I think the lesson of the last few years for the countries like North Korea have taken away is that they have nuclear weapons. They're less likely to be engaged in military operations by countries like the United States. The development of nuclear weapons is extraordinarily expensive. There's no doubt Ukraine probably has the scientific capacity to do that. It certainly has the ability to design and build missiles and other delivery systems. It really would be about the financial and the political cost of Ukraine developing nuclear weapons versus maintaining a more robust conventional military force.
You personally, General Ryan, are you kind of satisfied with the speed and the scale of Ukrainian military sector, how it's developing?
I think it's extraordinary. I mean, at the end of the Cold War, Ukraine really scaled down what was a very impressive military design production industry. It's had to rebuild that since 2022, but what it's done has rebuilt it in a 21st century fashion. It's a high-tech defence industry, not just with all kinds of drones, but things like Delta and AI and a range of high-tech manufacturers, as well as more conventional manufacturers like missiles, self-propelled howitzers, and a range of things. And having an indigenous, sustainable defence industry ensures that Ukraine will have the material it needs and isn't as reliant on foreign partners. That's a very good thing for the people of Ukraine.
Yeah, I just had recently Kurt Volker in our studio here in Kyiv, and he said that Ukraine is less and less relying on the U.S. support. And I don't know whether it's a good thing or not, but given the fact the United States is kind of withdrawing its support from Ukraine, I think that's a good thing.
Well, I think we'd all rather be allies and work with America and use their weapons. But, if that becomes less likely, Ukraine has to look after itself, and developing its own arms industry and partnering with many European countries is a very good way to assure itself of access to the weapons it needs.
Absolutely. General Ryan, the final one, just recently the Great Britain and its allies have been discussed a possible defense bank to pool weapons funding and help European countries borrow money at a lower interest rate for defense. What does this tell us? Is Europe finally preparing, for a long confrontation with Russia?
I think so. I think Europe has woken up over the last 4 years to a Russian threat that's pretty much fully manifested, not just on the battlefield in Ukraine or in the skies over Ukraine, but in the skies over Eastern Europe and in the sabotage operations that Russia has conducted in just about every nation in Europe. So you need money to be able to build up defence, and these kind of efforts, I think, to have cheap loans to procure military material are very important parts of that effort to build up Europe's defences.
General Ryan, I'm always happy to see you in our studios. Thank you for the explanation. It's very important for our audience. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Natalie. Always good to talk to you.